The war room was dark, except for the blue light of the hologram that floated in the center of the massive chamber. An Empress Violith stood before it like a statue carved from obsidian stone, her 4 violet eyes scanning the tactical display that showed 3 star systems burning in the fires of conquest. She had ruled the Cathari Dominion for 300 years, and in all that time she had never known a war as brutal as this one against the Syndicate Collective. A conflict that had already claimed millions of lives and showed no signs of ending any time. Soon her advisors stood in a half-circle behind her, their tall insectoid bodies rigid with tension as they waited for her commands. And their voices droned on about supply lines and fleet movements and casualty projections in that cold, mathematical way that her species had perfected over millennia of evolution. "We have lost 17 warships in the Viller sector," Admiral Catherine reported, his mandibles clicking softly as he spoke. "And our forward bases are running low on plasma cores for the heavy cruisers." Violith did not respond immediately, for she had heard such reports 1,000 times before, and the numbers had begun to blur together into an endless stream of death and destruction that she could neither stop nor escape from. She was tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, tired of the war and the politics and the endless parade of advisors who told her what she already knew while offering no solutions that could actually end the bloodshed. Then the alarms began to scream. The sound cut through the quiet murmur of the war room like a blade through silk, and every cathare in the chamber froze as red warning lights began to flash along the walls and ceiling. "Security breach!" Someone shouted. "Security breach in the Imperial Citadel." Violet's spine straightened with shock, for such a thing was supposed to be impossible, and the war room was buried deep beneath layers of armor and shields that could withstand an orbital bombardment from an entire enemy fleet. Her guards drew their weapons and formed a protective circle around her, their compound eyes scanning every shadow for threats. And for a long moment, the only sounds were the wailing alarms and the rapid clicking of armored feet on the metal floor. Then, the blast doors at the far end of the chamber hissed open, and 4 of her elite warriors came through dragging something between them. Not something, she realized as they came closer into the blue light of the hologram. Someone. It was a creature she had only seen in intelligence reports and xenobiology files. A member of a species that her analysts had dismissed as irrelevant to the grand affairs of the galaxy. A human, he was smaller than she had expected, barely reaching the chest height of her warriors. And his strange soft skin was a pale color that looked almost sickly in the blue light of the war room, with red blood dripping from a wound on his forehead and staining his torn uniform. But what struck her most was not his size or his injuries or the fact that he had somehow penetrated the most secure facility in her empire. It was the fact that he was laughing. The human was actually laughing as her guards dragged him across the floor, his strange flat teeth showing him what she recognized from her studies as a smile. And there was something in his small round eyes that she could not quite identify. "Your Magnificence," her captain reported, shoving the human down onto his knees before her throne. "This creature crashed a stolen shuttle directly into Docking Bay 7 and killed 3 of my guards in the process. How did he get past our orbital defenses?" Violith demanded, her voice cold and sharp as frozen crystal. "We do not know, Your Magnificence, but he refuses to speak to anyone except you." The captain's mandibles clicked with obvious confusion and frustration. "He claims he carries a message that only your ears may hear." Violet studied the bleeding creature at her feet, and she found herself genuinely curious for the first time in longer than she could remember. Humans were supposed to be a minor species from a small yellow star at the edge of explored space, primitive beings who had only recently discovered faster than light travel and who played no role in the great conflicts that shaped galactic civilization they were short-lived. Creatures who measured their entire existence in mere decades. Fragile things of flesh and bone who should have been crushed by the harsh universe long before they ever reached the stars. And yet here one was, kneeling in the heart of her empire, bleeding and laughing and demanding an audience with the most powerful being in the quadrant. "Leave us," she commanded. Her advisors erupted in protest, their voices overlapping in a chaos of clicking mandibles and hissing breath as they warned her of the danger and demanded that the intruder be executed. "Immediately," I said, "leave us." Violet's voice cracked like thunder through the chamber, and even her most senior admirals fell silent before her wrath. "I will speak with this creature alone, and anyone who questions my command may join him in chains." One by one, her advisors and guards withdrew from the war room, until only Violet and the human remained in the blue glow of the tactical hologram. She descended from her throne and walked slowly toward him, her clawed feet clicking against the metal floor with each step, and she stopped only when she stood directly before the kneeling creature. "You have 10 seconds to explain why I should not have you skinned alive for this intrusion," she said. The human lifted his head and met her gaze without flinching, and she saw no fear in those strange round eyes, only a fierce burning determination that reminded her of something she had not felt in a very long time. "Empress Violet," he said, his voice raw but steady as stone. "My name is Commander Marcus Cole of the Earth Defense Coalition, and I have come to tell you that you are about to lose this war." He smiled again, blood on his teeth and fire in his eyes. "Unless you listen to what I have to say." And despite herself, despite 300 years of ruling with cold logic and iron will, the Empress of the Cathari Dominion found that she wanted very much to hear what this impossible little creature had to tell her. The silence in the war room stretched like a wire pulled too tight, and Violet could hear the soft drip of blood falling from the human's wound onto the polished metal floor as she waited for him to speak. She had dismissed her guards and advisors against all wisdom and protocol, and now she stood alone with this strange creature, who had somehow crashed through every defense her empire possessed just to deliver a message. "You claim I am going to lose this war," she said, her 4 violet eyes studying him with the cold intensity of a predator examining prey. "The Cathari Dominion has never lost a war in 2,000 years of conquest. So tell me, little human, what makes you think this one will be any different?" Marcus Cole rose slowly to his feet, and though he barely reached her shoulder height, he stood as straight as any warrior she had ever known, with no sign of the fear that most creatures showed when they faced her. "Because I know things," he said simply. "Things your spies have not discovered and your admirals have not guessed. Things that will decide this war in the next 30 days, whether you believe me or not." He began to speak, and with each word Violet felt her certainty crumble like old stone beneath a heavy hammer. He told her about syndicate fleet movements that her intelligence network had completely missed. Massive formations of warships gathering in the darkness between stars, where no Cathari scout had thought to look. He described a planned ambush in the Villar Nebula that would destroy her entire third fleet if she sent them down the route her admirals had recommended just hours before, and, most shocking of all, he named a traitor among her own inner circle, one of the admirals who had stood in this very room and sworn loyalty to her crown. Admiral Catherine has been feeding information to the syndicate for the past 6 months, Marcus said, his voice flat and certain. He believes that the war is already lost and that the only way to save himself is to help the enemy win quickly and earn a place in their new order. Violet's claws tightened until they drew blood from her own palms. For Catherine had served her family for a century, and she had trusted him as much as she trusted anyone in her cold and lonely empire. "How could you possibly know such things?" she demanded. "Humans are a minor species with no presence in this sector. No stake in this conflict. No means of gathering intelligence on matters that concern the great powers of the galaxy. Marcus smiled that strange human smile again, and there was something bitter in it that she did not quite understand. That is exactly why I know, he said. Your enemies hired humans as servants and translators and disposable workers, because we are cheap and short-lived and too primitive to matter. And they spoke freely around us because they never imagined we might be listening. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the strange patterns in his small round eyes and smell the copper scent of his alien blood. Do you know what it is like to be dismissed? He asked softly. To have everyone look at you and see nothing worth fearing, nothing worth respecting, nothing worth even acknowledging as a threat. Violet did not answer, but something in her chest stirred at his words in a way she could not explain. Humans have been underestimated by every species we have ever encountered. Marcus continued. They looked at our soft bodies and our short lives and our primitive technology, and they assumed we were nothing. Just animals who had somehow stumbled into the stars by accident. His eyes met hers without wavering. They were wrong. And so are you. The Empress of the Cathars stood in silence for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of everything he had told her. And she found herself facing a choice she had not expected when she woke that morning. She could dismiss him as a madman or a liar and have him executed for his crimes against her security. The safe and predictable path that her advisors would certainly recommend, or she could take a risk on this impossible little creature and see if his information was truly as valuable as he claimed. What do you want in return? She asked finally. Alliance, Marcus answered without hesitation. Full military and diplomatic alliance between the Cathari Dominion and the human colonies. Protection for Earth and her people. And a seat at the table when this war ends and the galaxy is reshaped. The demand was so outrageous that Violet almost laughed. For no minor species had ever been granted such status in the history of her empire. And her court would explode with fury at the very suggestion of treating humans as equals. But she did not laugh, because something in the way Marcus spoke had caught her attention and would not let go. He was not begging or pleading or trying to bargain from a position of weakness the way most petitioners did when they came before her throne. He was offering a trade between equals, a partnership of mutual benefit. And he spoke as if he genuinely believed that his tiny fragile species had something of value to offer the mightiest empire in the quadrant. You will remain here as my consultant, she decided. Your information will be tested, and if it proves accurate, then perhaps we will discuss your terms. She gestured to the guards waiting outside the blast doors. Take him to guest quarters, not a cell, and see that his wounds are treated, she commanded. He is to be given food and rest, and anything else he requires within reason. The guards exchanged confused glances, but obeyed without question. And as they led Marcus Cole from the war room, he paused at the door and looked back at her. You will not regret this decision, he said. I promise you that, Your Magnificence. Violet watched him go with an expression that even she could not have named. And when the blast doors closed behind him, she stood alone in the blue light of the hologram for a very long time. She thought about power and trust and the strange courage of a creature who had risked everything on a single, desperate gamble, and for the first time in 300 years of rule. Empress Violet of the Cathari Dominion was not entirely certain that she was the one in control of her own destiny. The weeks that followed changed everything in ways that Violet had never expected or prepared for Marcus. Cole's intelligence proved devastatingly accurate in every detail, and each prediction he made came true with a precision that left her admirals stunned and her enemies reeling in confusion. The ambush at Velar Nebula was transformed into a trap of her own design. And when the Syndicate fleet emerged from hiding, expecting easy prey, they found themselves surrounded by 3 times their number, and were destroyed almost to the last ship admiral. Catherine was arrested in the middle of a war council meeting, and the evidence Marcus provided was so complete and undeniable that even the traitor's oldest allies could not speak in his defense. 3. More victories followed in rapid succession, each one guided by human intelligence that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And for the first time since the war began, the Cathari Dominion held the upper hand. Against their enemies, the War Council whispered that perhaps humans were useful after all, though they spoke of them as tools and weapons rather than allies, assets to be exploited rather than partners to be respected. But Violet found herself thinking of Marcus Cole in very different terms. She told herself that she was simply being pragmatic when she summoned him to her private chambers for strategic discussions, and she told herself that his perspective on the enemy was simply too valuable to waste on formal council meetings where he would be dismissed and ignored. But the truth was something she could barely admit even to herself. She enjoyed his company in ways that had nothing to do with war or politics or the fate of empires. Their conversations began with fleet movements and supply lines, but always seemed to drift into stranger waters. Explorations of philosophy and art, and the vast differences between their two species. One evening she asked him about human music, a concept her people had never truly understood, and he sang for her in a voice that was rough and imperfect, but somehow more beautiful than any sound she had ever heard. Another night they discussed the strange human practice of keeping pets, forming bonds of affection with creatures who could offer nothing in return. And Marcus laughed when she admitted that the idea confused her completely. "Maybe that is the point," he said. "We do not love our pets because they are useful to us. We love them simply because loving things makes us feel more alive." Violet considered this for a long moment before responding. "Your species puzzles me," she admitted. "You live such short lives compared to mine, measuring your existence in mere decades, while I will endure for centuries yet. And I would expect that brevity to make you more careful and more cautious about how you spend your precious time. And yet," Marcus prompted, "and yet you waste yourselves on things that bring no practical benefit," she continued. "You sing songs and paint pictures and form attachments to creatures who will die and leave you grieving. And you do all of this knowing that every moment spent on such foolishness is a moment stolen from the serious business of survival." Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked up at the holographic stars that filled her chamber ceiling, tiny points of light representing the vast empire she commanded. "Do you know what humans fear most?" he asked softly. "Death, I would assume." "No," he shook his head. "We fear an unlived life far more than we fear death. We fear reaching the end of our short time and realizing that we never really experienced anything that mattered." He turned to look at her with those strange round eyes that had stopped seeming alien to her. "Somewhere along the way, we cannot afford to wait for the right moment to feel joy or connection or love, because for us the right moment might never come. So we feel those things now while we still can." Fiercely and completely and without apology, Violet did not know how to respond, for she had lived for 3 centuries and expected to live for 3 more. And in all that vast stretch of time she had never felt anything as intensely as this human seemed to feel everything. She had ruled an empire and commanded fleets and shaped the destiny of worlds. But standing beside this fragile temporary creature, she suddenly felt like she had somehow missed something essential about what it meant to be alive. Her advisors began to notice the Baitoe change in her. The whispers spread through the court like poison through water. Rumors that the Empress had become distracted and compromised, enchanted by the alien creature she kept at her side like some exotic pet. The traditionalist faction grew bolder in their criticism, speaking openly about the danger of allowing human influence to corrupt the purity of Tethari culture, and leadership Varith heard the whispers and ignored them. For she was still the Empress, and her word was still law, and she refused to let the small minds of her court dictate who she chose to spend her time with. But she did not see the deeper currents moving beneath the surface of her empire. She did not notice the secret meetings or the coded messages or the alliances forming among those who believed that drastic action was necessary to save the Dominion from her weakness. She was too busy learning what it meant to feel alive, too caught up in the warmth of connection she had never known she was missing, too fascinated by the impossible human who had crashed into her life and turned everything she thought she knew upside down. And by the time she realized the danger, it would almost be too late. The night before the decisive battle was supposed to be a time for rest and preparation. A quiet moment before the storm that would determine the fate of the entire war. Varith had summoned Marcus to her private chambers to discuss final strategy, or at least that was the excuse she gave herself. And they sat together in the soft light of the holographic stars while the Empire held its breath around them. "Tomorrow everything changes," she said. "Either we break the Syndicate's power forever, or they break us. And there will be no middle ground and no second chances." Marcus nodded slowly, and she noticed the tension in his shoulders and the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. "Whatever happens," he said, "I want you to know that I do not regret coming here." Not for a single moment. Before she could respond, the lights went out. The holographic stars vanished, and the chamber plunged into absolute darkness. And Varith heard the hiss of a blade being drawn somewhere very close by. "Marcus, get down!" She screamed, but he was already moving, and in the flash of emergency lighting that flickered on a moment later, she saw him throw himself between her and the first attacker, taking a blade strike across his ribs that should have killed him instantly. Her own guards had turned against her. 4 warriors in the armor of the Imperial elite who had sworn oaths to protect her with their lives. And now they advanced with weapons raised and murder in their compound eyes. "The Traditionalist Council sends its regards," the lead assassin hissed. "Your corruption ends tonight. False Empress." Marcus Cole should have been dead or dying on the floor. But instead he was on his feet with blood pouring from his wound, and a look on his face that Varith had never seen before. It was not fear or desperation, or even anger. It was something older and darker, something that had been bred into his species through millions of years of survival against impossible odds. He fought like nothing she had ever witnessed in 3 centuries of watching warriors clash across 100 battlefields. There was no elegance in his movements and no precision in his strikes, just raw savage violence that seemed to defy everything she knew about combat and everything she thought she knew about humans. He grabbed the nearest assassin by the throat and drove a knee into the joint where the leg met the body, a point her people considered impossible for other species to know. And the warrior went down screaming as Marcus took his blade. Second assassin lunged, and Marcus ducked under the strike and came up inside the warrior's guard, driving the stolen blade through the weak point beneath the chin with a brutal efficiency that spoke of desperate experience. "How?" the third assassin gasped, stumbling backward in shock. "You are just a human." Marcus smiled with blood on his teeth and fire in his eyes. "Just a human," he repeated. "That is what your enemies said too, right before we killed them." He moved again and the third assassin fell. And then it was only the leader left standing against this impossible creature who refused to die no matter how much blood he lost. Varith tried to rise and help, but her leg had been injured in the initial attack. And all she could do was watch as Marcus fought the final battle that would decide both their fates. The leader was the best warrior among them, a veteran of 100 campaigns who had never lost a duel in his entire career. And he should have been able to kill this wounded human with a single stroke. But Marcus did not fight like anyone the assassin had ever faced. He did not try to match skill with skill or strength with strength, because he knew he would lose that contest every time. Instead, he fought dirty in ways that the honorable HFY warrior code had never prepared the assassin to handle. He threw a broken piece of furniture at the leader's eyes and attacked while the warrior was blinded. He dropped low and swept the assassin's legs out from under him with a move that no respectable duelist would ever use. And when the leader fell, Marcus was on top of him in an instant, driving the blade home with all the strength left in his broken body. Then it was over, and Marcus stood swaying in the middle of 4 dead assassins with blood dripping from his hands and his wound and his face. He looked at Violet with eyes that were already growing dim. "You are safe," he whispered. And then he collapsed. Varith dragged herself across the floor to where he lay, ignoring the pain in her leg and the chaos of shouts and running feet as her loyal forces finally responded to the attack. She gathered him in her arms and pressed her clawed hands against his wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding that was stealing him away from her. "Why?" she demanded, her voice breaking in ways she had never allowed anyone to hear. "Why did you do this? Why did you risk everything for me when you could have escaped or let them kill me and negotiated with whoever took power?" Marcus opened his eyes and looked up at her, and somehow he managed to smile even as his life drained away. "Because some things matter more than survival," he said softly. "I thought you might have figured that out by now, Your Magnificence." And in that moment, holding this dying human who had given everything to save her, Empress Violet finally understood what he had been trying to teach her. All along she understood what it meant to feel something so strongly that you would burn the entire universe down to protect it. She understood what it meant to be truly alive. "You are not allowed to die," she said fiercely. "I forbid it, do you hear me? I am the Empress of 1,000 worlds, and I forbid you to leave me." Marcus laughed weakly and closed his eyes. "I will do my best," he promised, and against all odds, he kept that promise. The medical staff told Violet that Marcus Cole should have died 3 times during the night, and they could not explain how he survived wounds that would have killed any HFY warrior twice his size. "Humans are stubborn," he said with a weak grin when she visited him in the healing chambers. "We have had a lot of practice at refusing to die." She wanted to stay by his side while he recovered, to watch over him the way he had protected her. But the war would not wait for personal feelings. The Battle of Cathay Prime began at dawn on the 3rd day after the assassination attempt, when the Syndicate's final fleet emerged from hyperspace in orbit around the homeworld itself. They had been reinforced by defectors from the traditionalist coup. HFY warships crewed by officers who had chosen treason over what they saw as corruption. And together, they formed the largest enemy armada that had ever threatened the heart of the Dominion. Virith commanded her forces from the bridge of her flagship, the ancient vessel Eternal Throne that had carried her ancestors into battle for 1,000 years. And she watched the tactical display with cold fury as the enemy formation spread across the sky like a plague. "They outnumber us 3-2, her new admiral reported grimly. "Our victory is far from certain, Your Magnificence." "Victory is never certain," Violet replied. "It is earned through blood and will and the refusal to accept defeat. So let us teach these traitors what happens to those who dare to threaten our home." The battle raged for hours across the space around the planet. Great warships clashing in storms of plasma fire and missile strikes that lit up the void like artificial suns. Violet's forces fought with desperate courage, but the enemy numbers began to tell. And slowly her fleet was pushed back toward the planet they were sworn to protect. She had almost given up hope when the sensors detected new contacts emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. More syndicate reinforcements? She demanded. No. Her sensor officer responded in a voice filled with wonder. The signatures do not match any known syndicate vessels. They appear to be a mix of civilian transports and converted freighters and ships. I cannot identify at all. A communication request flashed on her console. And when Virolith accepted it, she saw a face she had never expected to see outside the healing chambers. Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of some battered old transport ship, looking pale and bandaged but very much alive. And he was smiling that impossible human smile. "Sorry, I am late," he said. "Gathering an army takes time when nobody thinks you are worth listening to." Behind him through the view screen, she could see the fleet he had assembled. Dozens and then hundreds of vessels emerging from hyperspace in a ragged formation that should have looked pathetic compared to the mighty warships of the great powers, but there was something magnificent about them all the same. "Who are they?" Violeth asked. "The Forgotten Ones," Marcus replied. "The species your empire and the syndicate dismissed as irrelevant. The Veth traders and the Morani refugees and the human colonies and 100 other peoples who were told they did not matter in the grand scheme of galactic civilization." His smile grew fiercer. "I told them that was a lie. I told them they mattered, and that if they stood with us today, they could help shape a future where their voices would never be ignored again. And it turns out a lot of people were waiting for someone to say those words." The coalition fleet hit the syndicate flank like a hammer blow, their converted freighters and jury-rigged warships tearing into the enemy formations with a ferocity that caught the syndicate commanders completely by surprise. They were not professional warriors in military vessels, but they fought with something more powerful than training or technology. They fought with hope, with the burning, desperate hope of peoples who had been told for generations that they were nothing, and who were finally proving that belief wrong. The syndicate lines broke within the hour, their perfect formations dissolving into chaos as ships fled in every direction. And when the survivors finally limped away into hyperspace, they left behind a changed galaxy. The war was over, and not through Cathari dominance, as Violeth had always assumed it would end. It was over through something new. An alliance of equals that had never existed before in the long history of galactic civilization. A coalition built not on fear and conquest, but on the strange human concept of trusting. The weeks that followed the victory celebrations filled every world in the Dominion. But Violeth found herself retreating more and more often to the quiet of her private chambers. Marcus joined her there on the night the final peace treaty was signed. His wounds healed now, though the scars would remain forever. Marks of honor that he wore without shame or complaint. "Your advisors will expect you to discard me now," he said quietly, standing beside her on the balcony overlooking the glittering capital city below. "The war is over, and you do not need human intelligence anymore. So the sensible thing would be to send me back to Earth with a reward and a polite dismissal." Violeth turned to look at him, and in the soft light of the celebration fireworks, he looked so fragile and temporary. This creature whose entire life would pass in what felt to her like the blink of an eye bud. He also looked more real and more present than anyone she had ever known in 300 years of existence. "My advisors can adapt or be replaced," she said simply. She reached out and took his hand in hers, her clawed fingers intertwining with his blunt human ones in a gesture that would have shocked every traditionalist in her empire. "You taught me something I had forgotten," she continued. "You taught me that strength is not just the ability to conquer and control. It is the courage to connect with others, to risk everything for something that might not last forever." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "That is the most human thing you have ever said." "Your magnificence." Violeth laughed, a real laugh that she had not allowed herself in longer than she could remember. And she realized that she had been wrong about humans all along. They were not weak, because their lives were short. They were strong in ways that long-lived species had forgotten how to be. Strong because they knew every moment was precious and refused to waste a single one on fear or caution or holding back from the things that mattered. "My name is Violet," she said. "I think it is time you started using it." Marcus smiled and raised her hand to his lips in some human gesture she did not recognize but understood perfectly anyway. "Then I suppose it is time I asked you to dinner." Violet. A proper dinner without war councils or strategy sessions or the fate of the galaxy hanging over us. She smiled back at him. This impossible human who had changed everything just by refusing to accept that he was insignificant. "I would like that very much," she said, and as the fireworks painted the sky above, them and the galaxy turned toward a future no one had predicted. Two people who should never have met stood together and watched the dawn of something entirely new.